So the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "What is it that these men are testifying against you? Have you no answer?" And Jesus was silent. So the high priest asked again, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus answered, "I am. And you will see the Son of Humanity seated at the right hand of power and coming with all the clouds of heaven." And at this, the high priest tore his garment and he said, What need do we have of more testimony? You've heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to blindfold him and strike him, saying, "Oh, prophesy." And then the servants took him and beat him. And as soon as it was morning, all the chief priests and all the scribes and all the elders gathered all together and held a consultation. And they bound him and led him to Pilate. And Pilate said, Are you the King of the Jews?" And Jesus said, "You say so." And then the chief priest hurled many accusations at him. So Pilate said, What are they all saying against you? Don't you have an answer?" But Jesus was silent, so that Pilate wondered. Now, he had the custom every year during the festival to release for the people one prisoner, anyone for whom they asked. And at that time, there was among the rebels in prison a man who had committed murder during the insurrection. His name was Barabbas. And the crowd came up to Pilate, asking him to do for them as was his custom. So he said, "Well, what do you want me to do? You want me to release the King of the Jews for you?" He perceived that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to ask for Barabbas instead. So Pilate said, "Well then, what do you want me to do with the one whom you call King of the Jews?" And they all screamed to crucify him. And Pilate said, "Why? Why? Tell me, what evil has he done?" And they screamed out of control to crucify him. So that Pilate, wanting to satisfy the crowd, handed over Barabbas for them. And after flogging Jesus, handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers took him out into the gateway of the palace, that is the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole battalion, and they clothed him in a purple robe, and they twisted thorns together into a crown, and they put it on him, and they saluted him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him, and they spat upon him, and they knelt down in homage to him. And when they were done mocking him, they stripped the purple cloak off. They took his own clothes and put them back on him. And then they led him out. To crucify him.
Thank you, Pam. Everyone either like digital claps or
Thank you.
or little, but yeah. So thank you so much, Pam, for that. Just give everyone a couple moments to like let that sink in and think. Um, and so as you think, what we're going to do next is we're going to put you into breakout groups to sort of talk about what we just saw. So our themes this year are around Zoom being here in these little boxes, justice and trauma. And so that was part of what drove us as we figured out what story Pam was going to be telling us. So in the question list, before the question, there's a bold about whether it's a question pertaining to Zoom, culture, justice, trauma. In your breakout groups, you can feel free to talk about any of the questions, all of the questions. You don't have to answer the questions on the page. If there are other things you and your breakout group want to talk about, you are welcome to. We just wanted to make sure that we gave people a jumping off point in case you're the kind of person or mind that needs that. So we're going to go ahead and put everyone into breakout groups again. To just go through the questions for that first breakout group. Does everyone have the questions or does anyone need the questions? Okay, I will put them in
the chat. I need them.
Yep, I'll put them in the chat again. It should be a PDF, so you'll open the PDF, and so you'll still be able to have access to the questions once you open the PDF, once we're in breakout rooms.
Okay, thank you.
So it should be there. And then I think we are good to go into breakout rooms. I know Travis was trying to get people in here. Sweet. All right, see everyone later. All righty, we're collecting all the humans. All right. It looks like we may all be back. People may keep trickling in here. I hope everyone had a chance to both meet someone you didn't already know, as well as have some good discussion around the questions. I know my breakout group had a lot of really fascinating conversations about culture and people being in different countries and locations, which I thought is a beautiful part about this virtual conference is we can have people from quite literally all over the world. Which does sort of make this a more fruitful and full conversation. And I hope you guys are also feeling that. I just wanted to give a space here while we're all together in a bigger group. If there was anything particularly that struck you that you talked about in your small group that you'd want to share with the larger group. So yeah, I'll leave space open here. You can either raise your hand with the participant function. If you don't know where that is, you can also just raise your physical hand if your camera is on. If you don't have your camera on and there's a long silent moment, you can also just unmute and ask your question. And I think all of these could work. So it looks like, Patrick, I see your hand, so I will let you go first.
Thank
so go ahead.
you.
Yeah.
I found very interesting the section on media studies and how we can use the Zoom, the media, as a way of performance. And Peter Perry's reference to the use of the chat room as a way to refer to divide the group that you are featuring um, into groups as to refer to, let's say, in the book of Revelation, the 7 churches. I found that as creative and interesting. And with reference to the presenter, Pam, I found that she actually, even though there was limitation of the frame of the Zoom, but she used the camera to still relay, to tell this story. And when she was gesturing, she would not expand her hand as us missing out in the message she's trying to relay.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that reflection. I know, and I don't want to steal Kwang's amazing insight that I wrote down because I liked it from my group, but he said that Pam managed to extend the Zoom window to make a bigger stage in her looking at offstage characters, which I just thought was a great way to put something that I hadn't thought of before. So I just wanted to lift up his insight, and I really appreciated that. Let's see, anyone else? Yeah, Daryl.
Thank you very much. I think it was Nick Letta who said, pointed out in our breakout group, something I found very intriguing, which was, I noticed the use of the speaker's fingers and hands and her gestures. She noticed the eyes. And I thought, that's the thing. In our Zoom meetings, we need to use our eyes too. I mean, we're limited, obviously, in terms of space and a lot of other things, that we can't get too fancy with, maybe in Zoom. But with the eyes and the hand gestures and all, I just think that's so important.
Yeah, Pam, go ahead.
If I may speak to that, something I'd like to say that maybe some of you already know well and have thought consciously about, but just in case there's some who haven't thought about this, we know, of course, when we're in Zoom, we like to see each other, but that means we look at the screen and our eyes are not looking at the camera. So if I'm looking at your faces, I'm not looking directly at you. So if we really want to have our eyes looking directly at the people, like I'm doing right now, for some of us, it's more difficult than others, but I think it's well worth the effort to kind of train ourselves to, not never look down at everybody, but in performance in particular, if you can find ways to train yourself to look right at that camera. And just to say one other thing, so at the top of my laptop, I have 3 little portals, and one is a light. And for the longest time, I was looking at that. But if you look now, I'm not looking directly at you. I had to learn that it's not the light, but right here. And I, in fact, have a little sticky note that I put right above that teeny little hole, so that I can remember to look. And so I just wanted to take a minute to expound about that, since you mentioned the eyes, the eye contact, that in every story is going to be different and our personalities are different. But this, I think, is a really important thing to train ourselves to learn how to do, so that we can do it when we choose to. So thanks.
Yeah, Pam, thanks for that. Jeanette, I see your hand. You can go ahead.
So just to follow up on that, Pam, because we had some discussion about that, and one comment was that when you're in live performance, you have eye contact with your audience, but you don't on Zoom. So that is actually a bit of a problem for the performers. But on the positive side, we had someone say, I really felt like, I was questioning, who am I in this story, because the eye contact was straight with me, and am I meant to be Jesus now listening to Pilate? Or, so it was that question of perspective that is very powerful in this sort of medium where you're being very directly addressed.
Yeah, Pam, do you want to quickly respond to that?
Yeah, if I may.
Yeah.
Two quick things. Maybe even 3. It's really hard. And this goes back to the conversation Meg and I referenced that she and I have had about how you don't have eye contact. I mean, I'm looking at a stupid little mark on my computer right now, but my hope, And prayer and intention is that you feel like I'm looking right at you. So what I do is I channel my inner Mr. Rogers. If you're familiar with Fred Rogers, the Mr. Rogers show, he would talk about, how do you make your TV show feel so personal to the little children? And he would always say, I imagine one particular child right there, and I speak to that child. And I can't say I always do exactly that, but again, without taking lots of time about how one might go about it, to train oneself to believe. We walk by faith and not by sight, maybe, right? To believe that when I'm looking at the camera, you are getting from me what I'm hoping to give to you, that you won't get if I'm looking at you and getting your faces. So I feel like it's my responsibility to learn how to do this. So.
Yeah, and the thing that just made me think of, it's really interesting because when you're staring at the camera, each of us individually on our computers feels like you are speaking directly to us, which is something you can't do in person. You cannot individually look at every single audience member at once, whereas this medium kind of allows you to do that, which is fascinating. UN, I have seen your hand a couple times if you want to chime in.
Cool, thanks. It was picking up a little of what has just been said, and something that Nicoletta said in our session as well, which was, Jeanette, you mentioned that towards, there's a bit where you kind of wondering, where am I? Where am I in this? Who is the audience in this story? And Nicoletta mentioned that in the second half of that performance, that Jesus's person is, where is it? It's a race, right? It becomes an interaction between the crowd, Pilate, and the Jewish authorities. And Nicoletta pointed out that that's one of the first steps towards traumatizing, which is erasure, which I thought was a really, really important and really interesting observation that everyone needed to hear.
Yeah. Pam, it looks like John Falcone put a question in the chat. He says, have you trained yourself to move and gesture within the screen? And if so, how?
The answer is yes, and that's ongoing, that training, learning how to do it. I hated it. I love using space. I love being on a stage or in a classroom or in a sanctuary and using the space and moving. Well, here we are. So I had to learn to accept that that people aren't going to see my legs and feet unless I want to put myself way back there and look very small on the screen. And that can be a valid choice. For the most part, I've urged myself and being successful to say, okay, people are only going to see me about from the waist up. And then you do have to learn that if you have a gesture that you want people to see your hands, you have to learn to pay attention. And I will say that I always pin my own video so I see me out of peripherally. Even when I'm looking at you, I can see peripherally, and I've learned how to tell if my gestures are within. But as other people referencing they found useful and effective, I've also learned to not confine myself. It is okay for me to point like that. You don't need to see my pointing finger. And maybe you can, get that. Maybe that's part of the sense that someone has said that, it seems like the stage is bigger if I'm allowing it to be also beyond this little rectangle. So it's a balancing act. But yeah, I do rehearse what does it look like in this screen, and that includes the proximity too, because that changes how much you can include. So that's the short answer.
Awesome. Thanks, Pam. So it's been about 10 minutes in this big group. I'm sure other people have things to say. I would love you to take those thoughts, and we're going to go into our second breakout room. And for this one, focus on that latter section of the document I sent, which I can drop in the chat again for those of you who may not have it or may have lost it. So we're going to probably do like 15-ish minutes, and then we'll come back to this big group again. So Travis or Peter, whoever is dropping us into breakout groups, feel free to send us away. Give everyone a couple more seconds to return from groups. I feel like we may all be back seeming like I have the right number. So sort of the same as we just did last time, sort of if you have reflections from your small group or things that you haven't gotten to bring up yet, we'll talk for 10, 15 minutes just in closing here as a group. I just wanted to make sure we all reconnected here as a big group. Hopefully everyone got to meet someone new again in their chat. I know I ended up in the same group as Pam twice, which was great because I love Pam. But so hopefully you all got to meet someone new. And same deal, wave at me if you've got some thoughts, raise your hand if you in participant land, put a question in the chat, just start talking, any of the above. Yeah, Joanna, go ahead. You're muted.
My question's really for Pam. This is the set passage you have performed many times live. What was it like and how much did you modify to do it for Zoom? Is this the first time you've done it Zoom?
Good question.
Joanna, yeah, that is a good question. And no, it's not the first time I've done it for Zoom. I will say way back 100 years ago, last spring, I actually recorded the entire Passion from Mark because I had already been booked to perform it on Palm Sunday at a church. And of course, suddenly there was no church gathering on Palm Sunday and they wanted it. So I recorded the whole thing. And that was my first initial attempt at doing something on camera. And I don't ever want to look at it again. It's not because I've been learning a lot in these months. So specifically, I recently, using what I've been learning about working with this rectangle and this technology, you may or may not know that Richard Swanson and I just recently offered a 4-week course on the Gospel of Mark, in which I told many portions of Mark, including this portion. And so I had worked out a lot of my choices for this screen a month or so ago prior to today. But today was, I guess, my second time. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and how much did you change? Did you have to completely reconceive it? How much of your intonations remained the same? I mean, what was the process like? But I don't want to take the whole thing. So.
Yeah, it could take a long time. So I'll edit a lot. Well, one of the things, and it was commented on earlier, I've really been intentionally playing with, and that's the right word, and that's how I'll get at something, playing with, proximity to the camera. And I decided I liked doing this, at least for now. It might change next week, but for the whole pilot thing, because for me, that isn't a time where we're not hearing his thoughts. It isn't that kind of intimacy. But for me, it just felt like, of course I'm missing the word right now, but a way to get at, I'm sorry, I'm not able to articulate that very well right now. So I'll just stick with, because a lot of what I do is instinctual rather than analytical. It felt like a good way to go. But I was playing with it. I didn't do that initially. Other things too about the positioning are a big part of it. But I will say, I think I mentioned this in our first breakout group. One thing that has happened, not because of Zoom, but because of, we're always impacted by what's happening in life around us and what we're doing. I will say, regardless of what your politics or preferences might be, the fact is I cannot now separate my internal imagery of pilots, playing to the crowd from Donald Trump's rallies. It's just, I wish I could separate it because it's icky. But that's another thing that has developed internally that impacts what you see. Does that answer some of what you're looking for?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Pam, it looks like a lot of people are having fun comments in the comment, trying to articulate what you've sort of been talking about as that feeling of why pilot being close feels like the right choice.
Yeah.
So I just want to point people to the chat for that, just sort of the powerful invading spaces that they feel entitled to.
And I just want to say thank you. This is a gift a gift to me that I receive so much when I hear someone else's articulation of what they observe. It helps me to understand what I'm doing and how it's coming across. Thank you very much for the comments.
Yeah. Anyone else? Questions, reflections? Yeah, Balu?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Just to be on the lighter note, Fam, did you seriously work on the background of your space? I see two beautiful shawls. Anyway, but the question is about the background setting. Now, some of us may not have a good taste about the dressing, the background thing. Is it really important?
I think that it can be. For me, my default during these months has developed where I have this, kind of Asian screen here, which is 4 sections, and I can position it a little differently. And then I just have a collection of various scarves and cloths that I like. And so I've started hanging something because I didn't want just for most of what I do, I don't want just a plain background. So rarely does my choice connect specifically with in some way to the story that I'm telling. I'm generally just looking for a bit of visual interest and a little bit of asymmetry because I'm no designer, but I think that often works well. But I also have seen people make really good choices to have a particular something as part of the decor that relates to the story. I don't have a concrete example off the top of my brain right now, but a plain background can be fine, but I think our brains respond aesthetically to there being a little something, even a plain background. And again, often maybe we'll just have one scarf here, just a bit that gives visual stimulation to that part of the brain to engage all of our senses that I think is useful.
Yeah, and I just want to uplift a couple of things happening down here in the chat. Nathan highlighted, based off of your political rally talk, you've got the red, white, and blue behind you. Scarves looking kind of like banners, I think is interesting. But I also wanted to uplift Jeanette's point, talking about the importance of background and how backgrounds can also be distracting. I know my background is very distracting in that, Jeanette, since I have a closet with supplies and a bookshelf that's very busy behind me, and sort of a curating of your own personal home space as we're all in this digital world can be distracting or not distracting depending on who's looking at it. I think that's a great point, Jeanette. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah, Phil, go ahead.
We talked a little bit towards the end about, like, when you're teaching, think about what it looks like for people, where you're looking, the quality of sound and the quality of lighting may not seem important, but if it's not in place, then nothing's going to work quite right.
Yeah. It's like we all have to become our own scenic designers for our own little digital box, which someone who works in technical theater, I feel like I'm failing epically, but
There you
It
are.
really helps to have somebody handling technology for you, so you can just teach. So I realize that's a luxury, but when you can arrange that, even if it's a student who's just watching to welcome people into the room that show up late or whatever, it's
Yep. And I do want to,
so
on that
helpful.
note, uplift Travis, who has been doing all of the technical heavy lifting for this, putting y'all in breakout groups and managing, getting people here from the SBL official site. Like, he is the superhero. I am just the person who talks and MCs the event. So he has been.
Let me also lift up Erica from SBL, who has been doing
yes.
also an enormous amount of heavy lifting on the tech side, support side. Thank you.
Yes, also lifting up people I don't even know are behind the tech things. They are the superheroes of this conference, as this one day has shown me. Please thank them in every session you are in. They're doing great. Does anyone have other thoughts? Yeah, Jeanette.
Yeah, just something that came up quite a bit in our discussion was, and it really is a justice issue of whether people do actually have access to this sort of technology in some of our, non-Western settings, perhaps. And we're finding that people, or even an age question of whether people are comfortable accessing things like this. So particularly, we talked a lot more about worship and how and in some places there's much more focus on things like podcasts that are a bit easier to deal with, that can come across more professionally. But also just people sometimes just need, we need to be aware that not everybody has the technology, the access, the good internet, and that will be relevant to worship and to teaching as well, I think.
Yeah, and that's like a critical point to bring up, that there are so many of us who are fortunate to live in places where internet is easy to access, where we are financially stable enough that we can have things like laptops. And that is not always the case everywhere. And there is something inherently privileged about our ability to be here. Even while I know in my section, we talked about how Zoom can sort of be an equalizer, allowing people who maybe can't leave their house or couldn't afford to travel to foreign continents for conferences. So there is that sort of both and sort of sitting in tension with this, with the internet. But yeah, just a real quick point. We're about wrapping up. I'm sure people have plenty of other amazing thoughts, and I apologize if I've missed your waving at me. We have been recording the session, and I just wanted to, we would like to put it up on the Biblical Performance Criticism webpage. But in order to do that, we want to make sure that you guys are all okay with that. So if you are okay with that, can you just like wave or do the little clap thing or just some sort of indication? And if you are very much not okay with that, can you shoot me an email? I will put my email in the chat.
I'm fine with that. Yeah, you can post it.
Cool. I have put my email in the chat. Since it seems like overwhelmingly people seem to be okay with it. If you are not okay with it, please email me. Again,
can you just answer a question? Like, does that also include recording the breakout sessions? No.
No. Peter is shaking his head no. Peter is the one who has been handling the website, so that should not include the breakout sessions.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you for asking it. Hold on. Have I missed anyone's questions, anyone's thoughts? I want to thank you guys all so much for being part of this, coming here. Hopefully next year we can all gather in person, and we'll get to see each other in the flesh. And perhaps maybe going forward, we'll figure out how to do some sort of hybrid to keep those included who can't travel in person. But I appreciated everyone's insight. I hope everyone got to meet someone new, because ultimately this is a network session. So I was hoping that everyone could leave at least meeting one new person. And with that, I will let you guys all run away from your computers or do other things on your computers. But I just am so appreciative for all of you for being here. And it was wonderful seeing everyone.
Yes, wait. Thank you to everybody. I really enjoyed the session. Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
And I want to especially thank Pam for being with us and sharing her amazing storytelling. And her contact info is in the chat. You can go grab that now if you have further questions or thoughts and want to reach out to her.
Thank you for the welcome. It's been a privilege to be here. Thanks.
All righty.
Right.
Thank you all. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's not a message. Thank you.
Well, they took Jesus to the high priest. And there, all the chief priests and all the scribes and all the elders were gathered all together. Now, Peter followed at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he sat with the servants warming himself at the fire. Well, the chief priests and the whole council were examining testimony against Jesus. to condemn him to death. But they didn't find anything trustworthy. Many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony didn't agree. Many said, "Oh, we heard him say, I'll destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days build another not made with hands." But even on this, their testimony did not agree. So the high priest stood up before them, and he said to Jesus, "Have you no answer? What is it these men are saying against you?" But Jesus did not answer. So the high priest asked him again, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus answered, "I am. And you will see the Son of Humanity seated at the right hand of power and coming with all the clouds of heaven." Well, at this, the high priest tore his garments and said, What need do we have of testimony? You've heard his answer. What is your decision?" And they all condemned him as deserving death, and some began to spit on him, and others blindfolded him and struck him, saying, "Oh, prophesy!" And then the servants took him and beat him. And as soon as it was morning, all of the chief priests and all of the scribes and all of the elders were gathered all together and held a consultation. And they bound Jesus and led him away to hand him over to Pilate. And Pilate looked at him and said, "Are you the King of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "You say so." Well, then the chief priests began accusing him of many things, and Pilate said, What are all these things they're saying against you? Don't you have any answer?" And Jesus was silent, so that Pilate was amazed. Now, Pilate had a custom that every year at the festival, he would release for the people one prisoner, anyone who they asked for. And at that time, there was in the prison one of the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection, whose name was Barabbas. And the crowd came up to Pilate and asked him to do for them as was his custom. So Pilate said, "Oh, well, you want me to release for you the one whom you call King of the Jews?" He perceived that it was out of jealousy that the chief priest had handed Jesus over. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. So Pilate said, "Well, then, what should I do with the one you call King of the Jews. And they all screamed at him, crucify him. And Pilate said, oh, well, why? Why? What evil has he done? And they screamed out of control, crucify him. So that Pilate, wanting to satisfy the crowd, he released for them Barabbas instead. Mm-hmm. And then after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. And the soldiers took Jesus out into the courtyard of the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion, and they came together, and they put a purple cloak on him. And they twisted thorns together into a crown, and they put it on his head. And they began to salute him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him with a stick, and they spat on him, and they knelt down and worshiped him. And when they were done mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak. They put his own clothes back on him. And they led him out to be crucified.